I, like many others, walked out of the theater smiling after having seen the Super Mario Bros. Movie last year. I had even organized a second outing to bring my entire family to see it, especially my sister and her kids. It felt perfect. It felt like someone in Hollywood finally got it. 2 viewings and I was in love. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say, 2 viewings and I was shoving down some nagging feeling in the back of my mind in order to unquestionably love the film. As far as modern Hollywood goes, this was the perfect Mario movie, and I tracked its box office success with great interest. Once the film was released on home video, I immediately got myself the Steelbook edition and one day while working, decided to put it on as background noise. Now, during the months between theatrical release and this home viewing, I had actually been diving deep into classic films of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s, some of which were new to me, but most of them familiar in some fashion. I watched Assault on Precinct 13 for the second time in over a decade with my brother, which kicked off a John Carpenter kick right back into the likes of In the Mouth of Madness and Big Trouble in Little China. I watched LA Confidential for the second time that year and confirmed that yes, this is one of my favorite films of all time, and just thinking about it makes me want to watch it again. It's like that old meme where a single picture of Deus Ex makes you want to reinstall the game. I rewatched Chinatown again and The Maltese Falcon for the first and second time, and you know what? Noir is one of the best film genres out there.
You always have a very smooth explanation ready, huh?
What do you want me to do, learn to stutter?
I even rewatched Blade, which has to be one of the best vampire flicks ever made despite some of the worst CGI that belongs on mid-90s television, not a late 90s movie. Perhaps most fitting, however, was watching The Secret of NIMH for the first time since I was a child. I'm not so easily tricked by nostalgia, especially children's entertainment that I have a foggy recollection of, that I can enjoy something as an adult just because I liked it as a kid. I no longer care much for the original Ninja Turtles cartoon because I've grown up and recognized it as the cheesy, rushed production it was. I think parts of the Transformers animated movie are surprisingly well executed, but so much of the rest is insufferably corny and absolutely lame. You could argue that I shouldn't expect much because these things are for kids, but not only does that condescend to studios like Pixar, well, 90s and early aughts Pixar, but it condescends to children themselves as if they cannot enjoy something far more meaningful. As an adult, The Secret of NIMH was a surprisingly engrossing movie, well animated, well directed, well written, and well performed. It did not speak down to its audience just because they were children. If anything, it challenged them with a topic we often guard children from as best we can: mortality.
Jonathan Brisby was killed today while helping with the plan.
This opening line sets up not just the fact that someone has died, but was killed, which indicates their death was an intentional act on the part of another. As the story progresses, we follow Jonathan Brisby's wife, now widow, Mrs. Brisby, who is on a journey to find a cure for her son's illness. Death is creeping at her son's door, which is already indicating to the audience that your life can end even at a young age. Simultaneously, the simple act of a farmer plowing his land is treated as a life-threatening natural disaster that all the field critters prepare for by leaving their homes. The problem is, with her son Timothy ill, Mrs. Brisby can't move. This introduces a race against time, which forces Mrs. Brisby into situations where she must suppress her fear and even risk her life in order to find a cure for her child and move her home. Throughout the movie, the threats to one's life come in the form of illness, natural disasters, well, seemingly natural to field mice, and predators such as the farmer's cat. However, there is a secondary plot occurring within the Society of the Rats of NIMH that will involve a most sinister end to one's life: murder. It's one thing to die of illness, to a natural disaster, or to a predator. These are all natural occurrences where there is rarely any malice. Predators kill in order to survive, after all. Murder, on the other hand, is a purely malicious act that devalues the life of another that should be considered an equal. These are some heavy ideas, and ones that animator and director Don Bluth never shied away from. The Land Before Time or All Dogs Go to Heaven were also Don Bluth animated films, both of which also dealt heavily in mortality. While I wouldn't say the Super Mario Bros. Movie is condescending to children, I'd say it commits an even worse crime. It is condescending to its audience as a whole. Note that I don't think Super Mario Bros. Is a bad movie, nor do I want to convince people they shouldn't enjoy it. There is, for certain, a lot to like, and regardless of my criticisms, I believe the film is still fun. I just feel like I, and others, collectively oversold the quality of the movie for one reason or another. So let's take some time to look into why so many of us were convinced this film was better than it actually was. This might sound silly, or even obvious, but even by 2023 it feels like a Mario Bros. Movie looking correct is a divine blessing. Not too long ago, everyone on social media got their knickers in a twist when a Sky News anchor made light of a 13-year-old reaching the elusive kill screen in Tetris for the original Nintendo system, the first person to accomplish such a task since the game's release. Many were outraged, but I wasn't. Not because I agree with the woman, I think she's absolutely clueless and full of herself. However, if we rewind 20 or 30 years ago, back to when this woman was in her, late teens or early 20s, do we really think she cared about video games? Do we really believe she, in any point of her life, decided maybe video games aren't just for kids or boys after all, and decided to give them a try? No. She was probably just some average young woman that thought games were for kids or something only lame loser men enjoyed or something to that effect. And you know what? Hollywood, and the world as a whole, is full of men and women like that reporter. Video games were completely off their radar as some toy until suddenly, in the 2000s, they were bringing in unquestionably greater sums of money than the film industry. Even as Hollywood tried to adapt and figure out how to appeal to the gaming millennial, film critics and even Gen X podcasters would complain and gripe about any sequence of film that could be disregarded as too video gamey, despite the fact that most of these video gamey segments were originally drawn from and inspired by Hollywood. Regardless of what you think of the game itself, the fact that the showrunner on HBO's Last of Us adaptation, Craig Mazin, claimed it was the greatest story told in video games because they didn't shoot anything out of their eyeballs, demonstrates not only a lack of understanding of the medium, but a complete lack of respect for what can be achieved in the many science fiction or fantasy worlds in which these games take place. It is a classically elitist ivory tower take, and one that is shared by many in Hollywood. As such, the idea that anyone in the film industry would actually respect Nintendo's iconic plumber and the imaginative world he inhabits is nothing short of a miracle. Despite early reactions to their visuals, Mario and Luigi look appropriately like Mario and Luigi. Peach and Toad look like Peach and Toad. Bowser is Bowser. Everyone looks as they should. The film also follows the game world's logic with very little self-conscious commentary to how it all works.
Okay, so these bricks are just floating here?
I mean, that's about the only comment that can be perceived as embarrassed by the source material. Any further concern about the self-conscious worry of making a video game film is easily dismissed as Mario is swiftly plunged into a pipe maze, and then thrust into an obstacle course with power-ups and paying homage to the original game's various platforming challenges. Even before those floating platforms, a visual gag was presented where the mushroom people had to withdraw coins manually from question blocks at the bank. Within the first 30 minutes, it is clear that Illumination Studios was not embarrassed to be making a film based on a video game, but instead expressed a love of the source material. This is nothing to say of the gorgeous representation of Rainbow Road, a set piece that required a lot of work and retooling for the animators of Illumination to pull off. There's no pause to explain how Mario can stomp on a Koopa and use the shell as a weapon. The action sequence just plays out and expects the audience to follow along the ride. Honestly, the only questionable part of the whole scene is to specifically call out Blue Shell! When showing would have been sufficient without the telling. Save for Princess Peach's initial explanation of power-ups, the film wastes no time trying to explain to the audience why the game logic works as it does. We see Peach obtain a unique power from a fire flower, indicating that more than just mushrooms exist, which prepares the audience for a mushroom that shrinks someone instead of increasing their size, and that there's a power-up that grants feline attributes. No explanations, no treating the audience as if they're too stupid to get that these are all different power-ups. It just continues on expecting you to be able to keep up or already be familiar with these different rules of the world. Which is what many of us assumed had the critics rating the game negatively. The most cited quotes and references indicated a circle of reviewers that just didn't play or understand games, and that the greater audience not only loved Mario, but were familiar enough to get and enjoy it. After all, with Mario being a more recognizable icon than Mickey Mouse for decades, who wouldn't understand the source-accurate depictions of the Mario universe? However, letting those nagging feelings out from the cabinet in which I'd locked them in my mind, I might have to acquiesce to those critics, loath as I am to do so. To an extent, they might have had a point. There was one major flaw to the film that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew it had to do with there being little characterization, the movie just moving from one plot moment to another, and then concluding with character arcs completing without any arcs actually occurring. I didn't really know the root of the problem or how to phrase it until recently. Like many video games, the Mario Bros. Movie was written set piece first, and all the character and narrative that ties it together was added later. At least, that's how it feels to me. Side-scrolling platforming through New York. Bathroom plumbing hijinks that feel like they could have taken place in any other DreamWorks, Pixar, or Illumination film. Pipe Dream 3D. Pipe Dream 3D the sequel. Flight of the Dry Bones. Obstacle course that is literally a video game level. Unnecessary use of Take On Me. A fight with Donkey Kong that crosses logic between Smash Bros. And Super Mario Bros. Side-scrollers. Rainbow Road. The final boss fight on Bowser's airship. No, wait, just kidding. The real final boss fight back in New York. In times long past, Rainbow Road, the fight on Bowser's ship, or the fight in New York all would have been candidates for the final third act confrontation, but instead the Super Mario Bros. Movie decided to throw them all in there. There's just too much spectacle and action without enough time for proper character interaction or development. The problem is, I'm not sure if this is the fault of Illumination, Nintendo, or both. It's pretty well known at this point that Nintendo had input over this movie's production, though precisely how much is up to rumor and speculation. Why, for example, is Donkey Kong even in this film? I understand that Donkey Kong's origins are as Mario's first antagonist, but if we're going to be pedantic, that Donkey Kong was technically Cranky Kong, who was anything but Cranky Kong in this film. This Donkey Kong, styled after the Donkey Kong from Donkey Kong Country and therefore possessing an identity and legacy all his own, is only tangentially related to Mario. The end result is the inclusion of Donkey Kong and a weird reimagining of Cranky Kong that adds action to the film, but it also prevents any characters from properly developing. The journey from the Mushroom Kingdom to Donkey Kong's country allows us an opportunity to develop Peach's history, though with an unnecessary origin that doesn't actually characterize her. At most, it gives us room to speculate that she is so willing to let Mario tag along because he's human like her. But the film never does anything to actually suggest this, nor does it play with this idea beyond her initial recognition of him or her backstory. Note that having a backstory is not the same as having a character. Now, even if we remove the Kongs from this film, there is a gap that likely would have called for an action sequence of some sort, but it could have been used to develop either Mario further, or perhaps Luigi himself. Once our titular brothers enter the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario has more screen time with Peach than he does with his own brother, and yet the big, emotional moment where our heroes overcome their greatest obstacle comes between Mario and Luigi. In fact, Luigi may have less screen time than any of the major characters, save perhaps Toad, who isn't a major character so much as a generic walking joke of a sidekick because adults think children are stupid and will get bored if someone isn't being a memester every few minutes. Yet towards the film's end, Luigi has this sudden moment where he has the courage to help his brother. Because most of the modern movie-going audience is genre-savvy enough and, let's face it, overindulgent in the media it consumes, we can collectively recognize this as the moment where Luigi learns a lesson, acts upon it, and ties a bow on everything. Hooray! Our protagonists are learning to believe in themselves and work together! Only, we never saw a moment where they chose not to, or struggled to do so. In fact, Luigi's character is effectively defined as idolizing Mario and being, well...
Our mom called and she said, "Oh boys, that's the best commercial I've ever seen." And I said, "Thank you very much, Mother. We're very proud of it."
In A Tale of Underdogs, we establish Luigi as being less capable and more clumsy at platforming than his brother in the open side-scrolling segment. He is the underdog of the pair, having such misfortune as stepping on and breaking a doggy bone that draws the ire of a domesticated hound. He also has the clumsy misfortune of getting sucked into the pipe first due to his curiosity, followed by being plucked from Mario and dropped into a horrific hellscape littered with dry bones. Even his lone spot of safety is a hideaway for Shy Guys and Sniffets, which is what gets him captured. His last relevant scene until the film's conclusion is when he meets Bowser, in which he dedicates his time to being a bad liar and further idolizing his brother.
Do princesses find him attractive?
They do if they have good taste!
This is the last we see of Luigi doing anything significant until the film's end. There's been a lot established, from Luigi's idolization of his brother to his frequent misfortune, but what we're missing is the moment where he begins to develop enough courage and belief in himself to grab a manhole cover and protect his older brother against scorching hot fire. In other words, we established the beginning of an arc in Luigi's clumsiness and idolization, but then we suddenly get to the end of the arc where he has the courage to protect his brother rather than standing in his shadow all the time. The actual arc is missing. What the film needed was for Luigi to have an adventure of his own coinciding with Mario's, perhaps putting him in the position of protector to someone even more defenseless. Heck, we all want a Luigi's Mansion film now, right? Have Luigi find a way out of his cell, discover and help a fellow imprisoned Professor Egad, and then allow himself to be recaptured so that Egad can flee Bowser's prison. You get to tease a character that can be used in a future film while establishing the foundation of their relationship, and you can give Luigi a chance to find the courage and self-confidence in himself to behave altruistically and be a hero for someone. You then bring it all home when he jumps in front of Mario with a manhole cover. And hey, why not have Egad come in with some crazy machine during the airship fight to help out? Set up and payoff, even if it's a minor role. And we can still have Mario save him as the script currently calls for since he'll have been imprisoned once more. This could also parallel the attempted arc with his brother Mario. We've already established a sense of responsibility for Luigi's fate through their father.
I think you're nuts. You don't leave a steady job for some crazy dream. And the worst part? You're bringing your brother down with you.
This seems to be part of what the film is hanging on to. Mario's sense of responsibility to protect his younger brother while simultaneously proving he's not just some loser. The problem is, the latter conflict, proving that he's not some loser, is the more prominent. He struggles to complete Princess Peach's obstacle course that she aced on the first try. He is underestimated by the Kongs, and despite beating Donkey Kong, he is still taunted by the immature ape with accusations of being a loser. He is swiftly overpowered by Bowser and needs his own commercial to invigorate him to try and fight anyway. Mario technically has an arc, but his responsibility for Luigi is sidetracked by his relationship with Peach, because we need to hint at some potential chaste and hardly flirtatious romance between the two, I guess. A romance that, let's be honest, only exists because Shigeru Miyamoto is a big fan of classic cartoons such as Popeye. For those of you unaware, the origin of Donkey Kong lies in being a Popeye video game. When it turned out Nintendo didn't have the rights, they reimagined the game as an original concept, Donkey Kong, where Mario, at the time named Jumpman, tried to save his girlfriend Pauline, the replacement for Popeye's love interest Olive Oyl. The villain was always a big gorilla instead of Popeye's rival Bluto, but for the purposes of Miyamoto's sensibilities, this comedic love triangle would inform Mario's future henceforth. A similar antagonistic love triangle can be seen with Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and Pete. This dynamic was continued in Super Mario Bros., only instead of Pauline and Donkey Kong, the love interest was turned into Princess Peach and the rival was turned into Bowser, King of the Koopas. Which, honestly, is why I'm 100% on board with the depiction of Bowser here, as it's probably the most true to his characterization in the games, going so far back as Super Mario RPG. The threatening aura of this reptilian Hulk is juxtaposed by his lovesick nature, allowing for comedic and slapstick hijinks. Yet that threatening aura is never truly diminished, and allows for a successful and exciting final conflict between him and our heroes. Bowser is the best example of writing in this film, and the most true to the spirit of the games. The rest of the cast, however, are closer to being caricatures than characters, with Cranky Kong being a complete reinvention and Toad just being generic? Exemplifying the worst of modern family films by representing the condescending attitude adults possess towards the intelligence of children? At the end of the day, however, it's still more set piece than story, and because it's a family film, it does need to be shorter than your average movie. Even if you respect a child's capacity for intelligence and even maturity, the vast majority can only sit still in a theater or on a couch for so long before getting antsy. This isn't the same as being bored. The problem with the Super Mario Bros. Movie is that, instead of choosing to drop unnecessary characters or trimming some of the set pieces out or down, they chose to de-emphasize or never even broach relevant character development that would keep the film interesting on repeat viewings. Or, keep it interesting for non-gamers looking for something to latch onto beyond spectacle, like many of the movie critics that rated it poorly. Despite my criticisms, Super Mario Bros. Is still better than your average video game adaptation from the past. There's a sense of love and passion for the source material throughout its runtime, and while the character writing is lacking, they at least mostly feel appropriate for how they're portrayed in the games. I can forgive them for not characterizing Toad as the irreverent little fellow he is in the Paper Mario games, or the Mario and Luigi series, as those are on the more niche spectrum as far as Mario games go. However, this isn't like Halo, which was literally made by showrunners unfamiliar with and apathetic to the source material, getting a lot of the look right, but completely disrespecting and rewriting the lore. Nor is it like the Sonic the Hedgehog film, which feels like a generic Adam Sandler script they plugged the blue blur into without regard to his actual cool persona. Perhaps the flaws of the Mario Bros. Movies are less of a product of lacking care, and more a product of just where Hollywood and, in particular, family films are. An emphasis on spectacle over story, where characters are either bland or insufferable. I've retreated to films of the past for a reason, and it is primarily due to Hollywood's lack of imagination, passion, and skill compared to what was on display in the past. For me, I don't think we should just blindly love the Super Mario Bros. Movie because it's good for a video game adaptation. We should hold it to a higher standard to be a film as worthy as its legacy in games, but, well, not only is that a big ask of modern Hollywood, but does it really matter? I mean, really, how many games could make for good movies? Why do we want games to be adapted into film anyway? It feels like there's this concept of vindication, where having a movie made of your game or comic or novel is somehow seen as making it. Ah, yes, now the world can finally appreciate this thing I love. Only, that's not how it works. As good as the films are, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings still wrecks a lot of the source material and shoves in stupid, self-indulgent ideas of cool. There's as much done wrong with those films as done right, and very few people manage to get through the original books or appreciate author J.R.R. Tolkien's full talent after them. Movies are a great artistic medium, but they aren't the best artistic medium by default. They can tell stories that would make for lousy games, but games can tell stories in a way movies just can't. Or, in the case of the Mario games, deliver us a wonderfully imaginative, creative world without having to tell a story. I'm not against adaptations, but in regards to video games, perhaps it is better to select what you adapt more carefully, and perhaps focus on bringing a game's lore to life in a narrative-driven medium rather than recreating the game itself. That's how I feel, at least. Thank you for watching. Until next time.